So welcome back, everyone. We have one more presentation before the lunch break. I am very happy to be introducing Dylan Evans from Phillips. He's Principal Designer, Strategic Marketing for Phillips Experience Design. And even though the name designer is in his job title, it's more on the strategy and marketing process design than the physical designing. So he doesn't get to do much of the classical designing anymore, although he mentioned he works with the agencies as well and manages the process there. He's focusing on developing consumer engagement strategy for Philips consumer businesses, and a very ambitious goal of driving transformation towards an audience-centric innovation while improving lives of 2.5 billion people a year by 2030. And given the year we've had now, the next decade is going to be quite a challenge for improving. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the nice intro and the opportunity to speak. And thank you very much to everyone for allowing me to compete with your lunch. It wasn't a deliberate choice to actually have a picture of people preparing food, but that's just a very nice slide that we open with. I think most people know who Philips is, but not everyone knows just how much we do in healthcare. And as such, we do have a lot of transformation around how we can become a health technology leader. And this is a real big shift that started back in 2015. We're moving away from technology more towards health technology, more from products to solutions, and also sort of deepening the relationships, moving from transactions into actual relationships so that we can stay with people and be with people through their lives. And as far as our purpose is concerned, we're very clear that we want to improve people's health and well-being through meaningful innovation. So we don't just innovate for the sake of it. We want to improve the lives of 2.5 billion people by 2030. And so they're quite big, hairy, audacious goals that we have, and it sort of helps us be clear exactly on where we want to go and how we want to do it. And to get there, we need to understand, where we are and where we operate. So we call it the health continuum, which essentially is from healthy living, prevention through diagnosis and treatment to help understand, what is the particular issues that we need to solve, through to connected care, including population health management and so forth. And that's been very strong during COVID, as well as our respirators and respironics businesses, right through to personal health, which is the consumer businesses. And each of these areas do connect quite nicely in terms of people's health needs. But when it comes to personal health specifically, we are dealing with consumers. And as such, we need to be really clear in how we can communicate with them and how we shouldn't communicate with them. So if we do start talking to consumers, then very quickly we realize if we talk to them about health, the connotations that they have around health are pretty negative. They tend to think of illness or visiting hospitals and so forth. So in terms of the overall strategy that we have as Philips, in terms of being a real health tech pioneer, if we really want to be relevant to our consumers, we really need to understand exactly how they sort of think about health, how they want to take care of themselves, and what the key needs are and who exactly they are. And I think that's what we, the purpose of this presentation really is to understand a bit more about who owns that experience from one hand, and the perspective internally in Philips around how we can organize ourselves around that. Because I think it's quite clear that most consumers do have sort of a clear view of what they want. Sometimes they don't, and we can help them along in that area. So that's what I will sort of aim to talk about, is how we identify who we talk to, how we organize ourselves around it, and a couple of laws that will help us understand how they perceive us. So, Robert gave a very quick intro. I like pictures of Land Rovers because I used to drive them for my work about 25 years ago. So that's why I always include a picture of a Land Rover. But essentially, consumers do not care about matrix functions. They see the brand and nothing else. And that's such an important lesson for us each to have, because when we are working deep within our own teams and we're working on our own specific problems, it's very easy to forget this. And as such, we have our organizations. For us in Philips, it is a matrix organization. And even if it's a more a traditional organization, you'll still have similar sort of questions and issues in terms of multiple teams working on multiple initiatives, all heading towards a whole set of market targets, a whole set of consumers and so forth. And it can sort of end up creating quite a fragmented experience for the consumer. But also, they doesn't really give you they don't actually understand who you are as a brand. And to really help us understand what's going on, in the research I was doing, I found that there's a very pertinent law around how people perceive us. And this is from sort of software engineering and software architecture. And essentially, the designed artifact is a product of the communication structure of the organization that designed it. So with this in mind, what we sort of understood is actually the problem isn't so much in terms of how to create a better brand. We have a very, very strong brand. It's I think the brand value for the brand itself is about 12 billion. And so people have a fairly good idea of who Philips is. But in terms of how we actually execute and then talk to people, they get so many different types of experience depending on which part of the organization that they speak to. And that's sort of in a different way. That this illustrates, the past that we've been experiencing within Philips, and for our consumers on the receiving end, they will be targeted multiple times by different categories, because we don't always have the sort of the air traffic control necessary to actually understand and see how many times we're targeting the same person. We have multiple categories. So we have male, which does shavers and trimmers. We do female, which does hair depilation and hair care. Then we have dental with toothbrushes and whitening products, and mother and childcare. And each of these categories will have their own set of personas. And what we realized when we sort of looked across all of them is actually we're creating all these wonderful personas, but actually it's the same person, or it might be the same two people that all of these are trying to target. So there's a huge amount of duplication, but that duplication doesn't actually result in a really consistent experience for our end consumers. What they get is a very, very different flavor of Philips every time they interact with us. And that sort of comes out in, we have a brand activation layer and it's doing its own thing. We have the different business groups doing their own things. We have seasonal offers and we have sales, and then somewhere hidden amongst all of that is customer service. And these are big departments, but that's not an excuse for us to sort of slack and not actually deliver a clear and consistent experience to our consumers. And the sort of guidance we had around marketing and market activation was essentially around demand generation and sales enablement. And that's what we were looking at and dealing with in the past. And the big transformation that's happened and happening as we literally talk now is moving towards this, where we've really simplified our view of our consumers and simplified it into two core audiences. And that simplification is based on their values and what their particular need sets are as they are going through their lives. So we've got a very clear view of who those audiences are and what their values and needs are. And also then we're able to just plan all the categories and the upstream innovation, the downstream innovation, all around these particular audiences. We're then able to actually create a far better and deeper set of investment guidance, which is integrated with the upstream innovation, which is around the reputation, and that's very much around the brand itself, and that's sort of brand awareness and sentiment. But what's interesting around reputation is the payoff that you get in terms of what we call full price sell-through, which we see as a strong measure of brand value. Because if you keep discounting, then that damages the brand, but also people will see you as more of a value brand. So, what the reputation isn't just measured in terms of sentiment, it's measured in the sort of full price sell-through. Are people willing to pay that price for Phillips? Then it's demand generation, and I think that's, I think most of us understand exactly what that is. It's around the activation, it's around enticing, helping people be aware of products within categories and how that can help solve their problems. Sales enablement around sort of points of sales, direct-to-consumer channels and so forth. And then on the loyalty and reward, and I think loyalty and reward only covers a tip of the iceberg in terms of where we will be going when it comes to engaging our audiences. Because it's so, retention in the mobile world is a huge thing, and that's something that online, I think everyone realizes, has been realizing over the past few years, is the cost of acquisition and the lifetime value and so forth is, if you are retaining and engaging the consumers that you already have, then you're going to have a far more profitable model overall, because the cost of acquisition tends to be a lot higher, mainly because paid media is getting more expensive, but also paid media is getting less effective. So, the consumer audiences are then the starting point for the engagement, the innovation, creation, activation. I mean, those are very high-level terms. It's great, but where we start hitting back on things is where we can actually focus the brand messaging framework, the brand guidelines, the design language system that underpins the experiences across all the touch points and so forth. So we're not just going for consistency in there. What we're going for in there is to make sure that when we do show up, we show up and we hit back on the experience dimensions that show us as Phillips, as the Phillips consumer businesses. So we're not just looking for something that's sort of consistent. It's about that they will recognize it as definitely Phillips, and it's not because we use the same icons there. It's actually down to the messaging throughout that. We have run a 24-month strategic planning around the upstream innovation and developed different value propositions around it. And that, again, is sort of really focused on who these audiences are and the needs that they have. And that's these propositions can take a couple of years to get to the market. But in some cases, in my past lives, I've been working on those propositions only to find that when we do launch them, we didn't actually have the platforms or ecosystems in place to help us not only activate around them, but actually to engage the consumers for them. So that's where then we're on the creation and the activation side. We've been doing a lot of work already. It's downstream marketing around, where do we activate, which channels are we using, what touch points are we looking at, and creating actual ecosystems there ready for these new propositions to come into and arrive, so that then our consumers will be able to navigate freely within them. They'll be able to understand exactly what they are, and that each market that will be activating those propositions are already very much prepared for those activations to happen, and that the toolkits that they have are already in place. So we don't get so many of the activation and launch glitches that can come out. So just as an example, we do some planning. We create different numbers of ecosystems. They can be per market, it can be per set of market. And we sort of organize ourselves around, the existing touch points. We still have the seasonal moments and so forth, but the ecosystems themselves are now always on. And when a new product does come in, then we're very, very quickly able to disseminate it through the different channels within those ecosystems with a complete and consistent experience. We will, we understand exactly who our audiences are, which is great. But again, we don't own the experience. So even though we will build these ecosystems around particular audience need spaces, we still have a clear need for, the foundation, the core of things. I don't know how many of you spend a lot of time sort of modeling consumer journeys and so forth. I think they're very good and useful for helping us organize services and touch points and then assets and message hierarchies to work within those. But having said that, if someone just turns up on Phillips.com and wants to buy a toaster or a shaver, we don't turn them down. And so but we still need to assist them to get the destination of actually sort of converting and buying whatever it is that they want to get. So, we will get some of that traffic still coming in, and that's what the foundation at the bottom is there to cover, is to make sure that for that general traffic that's coming in, we can recognize them as specifically different to the audiences that we have and the ecosystems that those audiences are coming from. And we're also able to sort of spot, is there a difference? How many of this type of person do we need to sort of just cross-check our values? Are we missing these people from our audiences? Is it right for them to come in? But essentially, they can still own how they interact with us as they come in. So
there is a question from Anne.
Yeah.
How did you do the transition from multiple and scattered campaigns to a coordinated approach? And how is that going with organizational changes?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to cover that in a couple of slides' time. I've got a little, a bit of an example to help you through on that. So, part of it is, upfront, you've got to be clear on your strategy and your media audience. And the way we are in Phillips, we'll do that sort of centrally, but we will do it with the market so that we can have the necessary handshakes. Different markets have different touch points and so forth. But as you can see in this slide, we have so many different assets going on in so many different campaigns at the same time that we create not only a base toolkit to cover everything, but then each particular proposition gets its own toolkit. And what we found when we were doing this, we have we're introducing and making sure we have cascading KPIs. And we're using OKRs, and that's a whole different kettle of fish, and that's a whole topic for its own presentation. But that's something that we've been working very hard to do, because with that matrix organization slide before, you will have IT, you will have digital services, you will have digital marketing and e-commerce, and there's 3 different departments all doing just the web shop and so forth, each with their own separate backlogs. And the way that they were doing it before was they were doing it from a business plan, and that's a rolling 3-year business plan, and they were quite blind to what campaigns were going on. So we'd have a new product launching with a business case of 600 to 800 million behind it, and we would find it very hard to get that prioritized onto their backlogs. And what we realized was actually we need to take over their backlogs. And it's only when we had a clear operational and planning, marketing operations and planning link controlling that backlog, that we were able to actually make sure that we weren't just on surface level meeting our audience, but actually being able to provide them the right features at the right points and in time for particular launches to happen. So we'd have the necessary capabilities there. So that's one part of it. And the other part was, this is an example from DACH, where they had multiple launches going on for different levels of products, and there were particular sales moments and consumer moments they were targeting. And then we have the whole one stream going on here with different always on moments. And the feedback that we're getting from DACH around this is, in the past, the teams would always start off with paid marketing and then work out what to do next. So most of the budget would be absorbed by paid marketing, and then typically you'd see a sort of shark fin effect when it came to traffic and conversions, and in general, how TVCs also worked on that. And when they started doing it this way, they did a very nice campaign with a magazine in Germany. And within the whole exercise, what they found was, and the subsequent exercises, they don't start with paid marketing anymore. They're actually looking at owned and earned channels as a way of actually perpetuating the engagement, and that the paid marketing just augments that activity. And so that's the shift that this has enabled, and that's the behaviours that they have were emerging because we actually were able to open up a space for them to use that behaviour and how they activate across those different channels. Whereas in the past, the toolkit and tool sets and the approach that we had was only geared towards paid marketing. So even though they wanted to use more owned and earned, they were being funneled into a path of paid marketing. And so that's one of the key benefits that's coming out of this, is the whole approach of which types of channel and media are we going to work on. Actually, they were looking at owned and earned a lot as well. So this is an example of that. process that they were going through. And the activation input comes from central. The market takes it in. They work on the activation input. Then the local digital marketing team looks at the omnichannel activation calendar, and through that, that's where they start deciding, okay, are we going to put a launch tier one? How much budget are we going to put it together? What's target within this particular market? How big is it? Where are they hanging out? And then planning it out across that. What are the relevant sales moments, consumer moments that will also pan into that? And then that gets mapped per market so that it's actually coordinated and clear how many different teams are going for the same consumer or the same sales moment. So you can get that type of activation. So you have a clear dashboard and view across all of that, but also that the teams doing it have a more open choice and viewpoint of the different channels that they can use. And they can actually play off each other with different campaigns going on with the awareness that they're able to get from that. Once they've launched that, it's the normal story of activation and optimization, and that's just normal execution. So at a functional level and also media buying. And then the reporting and insights. So the digital marketing team will look at the media performance and so forth and start feeding that back in for any new activations that come in. And the beauty of this now as well is that we're using a whole plethora of dashboards, which each market can not only update and put details into, but they can come up with their own dashboards. And the best dashboards, we give them a prize, and then we promote that up to a global dashboard. And so with that feedback loop, what we're finding is on one hand, we're able to sort of get the data shifting, get it moving, and breathe some oxygen upstream, so that we understand, what's working, what isn't working, which tools, assets, and guidelines need to be adjusted or just rolled out into other markets. But also in terms of the culture around it, that they understand how much we value not just their data, but their expertise in understanding that data and how to present that data. So that's the other aspect of why we allow them and why we sort of create that opportunity for them to create those dashboards. And then we can champion those dashboards at a global level to sort of start sharing that particular market insight across all the other markets. But this is everything in here that's sort of going on here is what I describe as the second diamond. And what do I mean by diamond? Well, I've got a design background, and the Design Council in the UK did some research across hundreds of agencies, and they found they had a fairly common process around coming up with ideas, design solutions, and products. And it was roughly split into these two phases, two big diamonds with discover, define in the first diamond, and then develop and deliver in the second diamond. So essentially, in the first, you're diverging, you're exploring, you're widening the problem space. You want to really understand, the context of the problem. How has it been solved before? How consumers are solving it themselves at the moment? What are the non-consumption competition? So, the non-consumption is one of the biggest competitors that we're not really aware of until we actually start talking to consumers and understanding, how they actually own that experience themselves at the moment. And then from that, you can start defining which areas are relevant. And at that point, you start converging down. So you reduce the number of possibilities into sort of a handful or a number of them. And then you take those candidates on and start developing on them. You start developing solutions. You need to start actually exploring around again and finding different candidates that you can work with, different types of prototypes, functional prototypes, visual prototypes, dark horse prototypes, before you then sort of start killing some of those prototypes and delivering down on a solution that works or an approach that works. And so what's relevant about this is the balance between the central and the markets and the different approach that we're taking around the whole strategy for this is that we consider ourselves as working on the first diamond, and the key is that we understand that they need that space to diverge and then converge themselves downstream. And what we found in the past was that inevitably we were constraining the creativity that they had in where they would show up, which channels they would show up, how they would show up. We wouldn't be clear on what best way they could show up. For example, doing audio adverts on Spotify, the markets were doing that. It wasn't something that the global team were aware of, and so the global team weren't creating assets for that market. But at the same time, the market didn't actually have that budget for it. So they had some operational constraints to find that budget. And so that's why they need that breathing space downstream, so that they can actually find those solutions, so that then they can actually do something that's very, very locally relevant and help them actually deliver on the sales targets, but also on the what the consumer really needs to be, the consumer experience needs to be in that market. So,
hey, Dylan,
yes,
there's a question coming in from Kathy Bueller, who is raising her hand, so I'm going to bring her on stage.
great.
Hi, Kathy.
Sorry, actually, I pressed the wrong button. I wanted to give you a clapping.
Okay, no problem.
A question, but very interesting. Sorry about that.
Great,
No problem.
Great. Any buttons better than no buttons.
Exactly. Yeah, and there was a positive comment from Simonetta earlier. She agreed with you with regard to owned and earned media. She would also add shared media. And she suggests the reversal of peso from paid to earned to shared to owned to OSEP to the reverse.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I think there's a lot to be learnt in that. And it's interesting, the sort of general level of awareness that people have around those different channels, and then the interplay between them. And to that end, we're defining several sort of so-called dialects of our design language. And part of that is really being aware of how people come to the particular touch point, where they've been and what their experience has been there. Because whenever I think I see design and marketing like this, a lot of designers disagree and a lot of marketers disagree, but they're so similar. Because in design, if you want to design something, you need to know what they were doing 5 minutes before, what they're doing now, and 5 minutes later. And I think that the exact same is so important in marketing, because if you know where they've come from, and if it's going to take an OSEP journey, or peso, or whichever way around, then there's certain provisions that we can make to make that a lot easier for that consumer, and then equip our markets to actually sort of serve them to that end in the best way. So I am sort of infusing quite a lot of design stuff in here, if you don't mind. So essentially, throughout all of this, what we did was we defined the audiences. We've enabled teams with some specific tools, but also that they can build upon those tools by creating those dashboards, and also by sort of taking a creative viewpoint over the overall strategy and then execution of it, to allow teams to have that space to execute and so forth. So they can almost have sort of localized newsrooms in each market that sort of not only doing community management, they're actually developing communities. And developing events around those communities, but not sort of full-on experiential marketing types where you show up with a truck which is fully branded, but actually just being present and understanding then, not just in terms of wanting to push products to people, but understand how people are doing things at the moment, so that we really blur the lines between marketing and market research. It's quite an interesting sort of set of approaches that we're defining and working on at the moment. So essentially, from all of that, the matrix organization as it was would give us this sort of experience. So our different types of customers. I mean, I've been talking mostly about consumer, but we have similar issues and opportunities to solve in the healthcare space as well, and in the B2B space for multiple partners. But what we've been able to do is create a lot of clarity about who we are, a lot of clarity about exactly who our consumers are, and have managed to look to find a way of having consistency across the upstream innovation, downstream innovation, and marketing, so that then we can create a really consistent experience that our consumers and customers can own and can come in on their own terms. So essentially, that is the scheduled material. The benefits of all of this, mainly it's consumer first, one voice to the customer, but also one voice from the customer, because also with the categories we had so many different market intelligence functions coming back with different snippets. Being able to have a clear clarification between them is also very, very useful because the teams really know who they're innovating for. We orchestrate that focus a lot more, but also create enough space for them to have that creativity where they can add their value. Cross-channel amplification, PESO and OSEP is, that's the magic of all of it. And then what comes out of that, because we have a clearer viewpoint of exactly where people are coming from, is that performance management. We can really target really specific items within journeys, within assets, within even propositions, and which product features work and don't and so forth, to actually really drive all of the innovation streams and all the marketing streams. So that's the end of the slides that I have. And if you do have questions, I'm really looking forward to them.
Thank you very much. There is a question connected to the earlier question about the transition. How long did this journey take from fragmented to seamless customer experience?
The question is will it ever finish? And I think that's the viewpoint we have on most of these strategies is similar to the OTT question earlier. You will have teams coming out with new propositions and so forth. Philips is a very big company and people are very, very busy with their day jobs. So we've deployed, I'd say, 80% of it. And I think we'll only ever have 80% because, new teams are coming on, new teams are moving roles and so forth. And not every single role has been activated. But I mean, that's the structural deployment. But in terms of the operation of it, we need to keep it sort of always on, as it were. Because I don't think if we ever think it's been completed, then I think it's a very dangerous thing to do, because I don't think it will ever be complete, and I don't think we should ever label it as complete. I think there's just going to be a different level between how intense it has been in terms of making all those changes and just the intensity going down a little bit, because it's something that we always have to keep working on. New channels keep appearing. New agencies might be coming on. We do have sort of global agencies, but we also have some local agencies, and we have new sort of consumer marketing managers coming in who might not have done the full training. And so that's where we always have to keep it alive within the culture to make sure that people are sort of constantly aware of how they can keep improving it and keep being aware of it. So that's why I don't think it's ever going to be complete. But we've gone a hell of a long way with it, which is great.
It's very interesting. And for me, the most interesting parts were the description of the cross-channel alignment, how you're working with several ecosystems simultaneously, and the cascading KPIs I thought was very, very interesting, very insightful.
Yes, and I'm sort of aware as well that some of these things might be big company problems, but also with my background in startups, it's the same issue that we have. Even when we were a team of just 6 people, having real clarity about how it all fits together and how it all fits, one objective is driving it. These are the how in terms of the key results, getting the flexibility within the how you deliver, but how that delivery then ladders back into the overall sort of vision and mission. It applies to startups. It applies to Philips as well. And there's a whole OKR stream going on at the moment, which sort of integrates with the lean and the daily management and the dashboarding that we have there. And I mean, it's quite significant, the difference it has, not just in the focus, but also the communication and awareness across teams. And I think with COVID, it's become even more critical that with the out of sight, out of mind is just sort of been amplified to 11, because people just don't see each other as often or don't have those chances encounters, and we can't rely on that. So we really have to have a clear structure in place, but one that allows enough of that creativity. So in that cascading KPI, it doesn't tell them how to achieve the KPI. We give them a set of tools, and we have analytics on the tools, and so we can see which tools they're using most, which tools they're not using much, and then we can sort of optimize and help them and get feedback from them as well over how those tools are working or not. But ultimately, it's sort of culture change, creating a real culture of sort of servant leadership to bring out the greatness of all the teams that we have. Because in some cases you could see in different parts of the company where people, they had a job, but they actually had to fight to do their job. And that's something that we don't see as much. Sometimes see it because you still see, culture takes time to change. But ultimately, that's what we're working towards, is making sure we have an environment to bring so that people can excel and exhibit the greatness that they all have.
There is a follow-up to an earlier question from Sonia. She had asked about how long the journey took. She said, yes, I agree. This is never done and needs continuous work. But I was wondering how long it took for you to get to the point where you are today.
It's taken, we kicked off the consumer engagement strategy in September last year. And it's been really, really fast. We've deployed it to all the key categories of businesses and to all the key markets. The deployment is ongoing because it needs to show up a bit more strongly in particular places. And so that's what we're working on is, okay, we've deployed it here. Did we spread too thinly? Where is it thicker? Where do we need to augment it and so forth? But already it's sort of invigorated a lot of the people working on the propositions, a lot of the people working on the ecosystems downstream as well, because we took a very deliberate approach. In terms of the two audiences, we decided not to give them the traditional Phillips type names. And we call them like the bideologist and the hyperquantifier and so forth, which are very non-Phillips terms. So we're being quite clear around the language and the branding that we're using internally, and that's really helped speed up the adoption of it because people are like, hey, this doesn't seem quite like Phillips, and so they really want to get involved. And it's sort of, on one hand, is polarizing, but thankfully it hasn't polarized too much. And the people who are initially turned off by it, we still give them enough opportunity to come in on their terms as well. So that even though it feels a little bit uncomfortable, it's a little bit out of reach, but not too far out of reach for them, so that they can actually engage with it, and we don't turn them off. So yeah, it's been really fast. It's been very challenging, and still a lot of fun. But it's still sort of, I still see it as a bit day one. We've got a lot of the platform and infrastructure work ongoing as well, and a lot to do with that.
Another question from Natalie from SAP. Do you struggle with a lack of understanding in teams when it comes to the brand to demand approach, and how do you overcome the work in silos?
There's two very, very big questions. The brand to demand, that's been a bit of a challenge because normally you can keep the KPI within a silo. And the typical brand KPIs stay within that silo. But when we start using KPIs like full price sell-through, then the level of involvement from other silos has to increase. And they understand their contribution and they understand the importance of the brand in their proposition. So the selection of the KPIs helps in terms of breaking those silos, but also at the same time, we still have clarity over who's responsible for what. Also, in terms of how we're organized now, in the past, Phillips was a conglomerate of multiple business groups, but now we've sort of clustered those business groups together, and that's enabled us to have single voices. And then beyond that, adopting Agile and Scrum is one thing, and applying that in marketing is just amazing when you do that, because you're able to bring in multiple disciplines who are taking responsibility as a team. So the role of the individual is very, very different. So I think that has helped. But the thing I've noticed is that those silos run very, very high. And it's the sort of top leaders that are finally the pennies dropping with them exactly, how much benefit and value there is in allowing that collaboration, while they can still be responsible for the KPIs that they have, but they don't actually have to protect things as much with particular P&L constructions. Because with the different ways it was organized in the past, you had P&Ls not wanting to sort of pay for other initiatives and so forth. Whereas if you start working across using OKRs and KPIs, you can actually clarify that argument over who's paying for what. And and actually working towards initiatives rather than just a category-based initiative. Does that answer your question?
Let's see if we get a reaction then from Natalie. Yes, thank you.
Great.
It was a good answer. I will concur.
Yes.
And let me also turn off the slides so you can see the questions as well, and we can see you better as well.
Great.
We have time maybe for another question. If anyone wants to come on stage, raise your hand or ask any comments or questions. I found this presentation the most tangible one today. For me, I found it very interesting. And it's funny that you should mention Scrum and Agile, because we're going to be exploring that in the afternoon with some sessions on that. And I look forward to that as well. So I think that will be interesting. So
yes,
the applause is
definitely.
coming in, as you can see already.
Thank you for listening.
So if not any other final comment or question, I would like to be the first to thank you for a great, very tangible, practical keynote presentation for this event. It was great. It was very insightful. And what we will do now then is we'll head into lunch, and we will return at 2:15 Central European Time, 2:15. We'll leave the lounge open, so anyone can chat there. You can just click a chair while having lunch, and we'll reconvene then. But again, thank you for a great presentation. Thank you everyone for your attention to the presentation, and we'll meet back in about 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.